Now that we are ready to start our interview project for the semester, I've come up with some instructions and I'm creating this video to help you go through those instructions and think about what you want to do for your interview project and how you want to organize it. So the interview project is going to be worth 150 points total. Originally in our syllabus, it was only 100 points and we were going to have assignments during the semester, but I've decided to change the syllabus and put a lot of those assignment points into the interview project because I think the interview project will get to the concepts that I wanted to create assignments about potentially better than an assignment would, especially since from week to week we have a lot of reading and you have the quizzes, so you're already pretty busy from week to week. So I hope the interview project is a way that you can apply the concepts from class and then also use what we've learned to evaluate actual salary structures and organizational compensation strategies in using the concepts from class, but also in a real world context. So this project, I'm going to have you interview two HR professionals who work with compensation. So those can be either people who are specialists in compensation, which is much more likely to be the case in larger organizations where they'll have a large HR department, and there might be people who have specialties within that department. It can also be people who are at smaller organizations where they are an HR person of one, or they have a very small team where there's not anyone on the team who necessarily has a specialty in compensation, but at least that person works with compensation in their organizations. And what I want you to do is I want you to learn more about their compensation strategies and the salary structures they have in their organizations, how those were developed, how they're applied in that organization, whether those professionals think that those structures work, what kinds of changes they've had to make, and why, that sort of thing. So the learning objectives in this project, there are several. Really, I want you to apply the theoretical concepts that we're learning in class to real world organizational contexts. So, especially because this is a senior level course, I really want you to see what this looks like in the real world. I no longer work in a world where I would do any of this kind of work in HR. And in fact, I don't have an HR background. My background is to do project management. So I had to do a lot of HR work. But I don't do that kind of work anymore, at least not at the level where I have budgets and I have to worry about people's compensation within those budgets. So that's why I also want you to do this project to see what this looks like in the real world, what it looks like now, especially with a lot of the changes that we've had in the last few years with the pandemic and with the development of AI. And also, I want you to understand if this might be something that you would be interested in going into in your career. Would you want to work in compensation? Compensation is a specialty in HR that's actually very highly paid. We in this class are really theoretical about compensation, but in real life, compensation would also include analyzing data and using metrics and analytics to do that. I also want you to compare and contrast different compensation strategies and their business impacts to see how businesses actually pick those strategies and then how they might update them if they aren't working, or if they are working, how do you enhance that strategy even more? I would like you to develop professional networking skills. So you can use this, or if there are HR people that you've wanted to talk to or the companies that you've wanted to learn more about, use this project to talk to someone in those companies. And you could even use this like a shadow interview if you wanted to ask more about people's jobs as part of the project, just to find out what they do, and how that company works a little bit better than what you may already know. I want you to strengthen your analytical thinking by evaluating compensation decisions because I think for most of you, if you use compensation or anything that we have in this class in your jobs now or in the future, a lot of that is going to be analysis of systems that already exist. And so I want you to be able to do that, or at least start working on that now, because that's a skill you'll need to develop as you go through your career. And then I want you to enhance your communication skills through interviews and presentations, through contacting these HR professionals. For those of you who work, maybe that sounds pretty like day to day. But I know some of you who've only done internships or only have had part-time jobs where maybe you don't regularly email or schedule people for different projects or for interviews or meetings, this would be a good time to learn how professionals do things. I recently talked to some students. I'm a faculty advisor for a few different student groups, and some of my students are realizing, like, if you want speakers to come in and talk to your group, for example, or if you want to do something with professionals, you need to give them more than 1 week's heads up oftentimes, because professionals are often their schedules are planned out weeks in advance sometimes, and they may not have time just a week before to do something. So that would be a good lesson to learn now, when maybe the consequences aren't as big as later, when you're at a workplace and you're expected to, manage a project or manage other people. My cat has joined us, sorry. So here's the project requirements. There's two parts to this, and in the table below, I give you some due dates and things for the different parts of this project. The first half is the professional interviews themselves. I want you to identify and interview two compensation professionals from different organizations so that you have something to compare and contrast. I want you to develop an interview protocol to use with those professionals. And I want you to personalize that protocol to some extent, knowing a little bit about their organizations, and potentially even if you have some information about their compensation strategy before you go into the interview. You may not have that kind of information. You might just have some basics about the organization that you can figure out from the website. That's also fine. I want you to record both interviews via Zoom. Um, I will tell you one note, the Zoom accounts that you have as students are limited to 1 hour. So at 1 hour, it will shut down. If that happens, you can open it back up and start recording again, like a second part of an interview. Hopefully none of your interviews go that long. Even when I do research, I rarely have interviews that go over an hour. But in case that happens, don't be alarmed. That's just the limit that's on student accounts. If you own your own Zoom account, like you have a private account or you have one for work that you're allowed to use for this project, that probably has no limit on it. If you've bought the account, if it's paid for by someone else or yourself, in which case then you don't have to worry about the hour-long limit. And then I want you to submit those interview recordings with your final presentation. If you want to, if you're using a K-State account, you can leave the Zoom recording up in the cloud and just send me the URL and the password that comes with it. And I'll put instructions up with this on how to use Zoom to record videos, as well as where it's stored in the cloud. What happens is, if your name is on the account, which it should be, because you're going to log in with your K-State credentials, it will send you an email when that Zoom video is ready. It's usually just a few minutes after you've finished. And that email will have the URL and the password. Those are the things that I need. If you want to, you could put up the interview on YouTube, but I will say, if you put the interview up on YouTube, be careful that it's a private interview, especially if there's any kind of sensitive information in the interview that someone doesn't want to disclose and they're only disclosing to you because it's part of a class project. Sometimes YouTube has like spiders that go out, and there are lots of other, like, search engines do this as well. They go onto websites to find information, and if it's not listed as private, it's very possible a spider picks up that URL, and then when someone searches for something later, they find that video, and then information that was supposed to be confidential has now been disclosed online. So be careful with that. For the second half, I want you to analyze the information you've collected and create a video. You're going to create a 10 to 15 minute video presentation. I need at least 10 minutes. If you go over 15 minutes, I'm not going to worry about it at all. So don't feel like you have to time yourself at 15 minutes. I'm hoping that you have so much information that you have more than 15 minutes of points to talk about. That would be great. And I want you to analyze your findings. I will show you the rubric at the end here where you can see what I want you to include in your video. I want you to compare and contrast the compensation approaches that these organizations have taken. I want you to apply course concepts to evaluate the effectiveness of each approach. And the effectiveness can be from the perspective of the person you interviewed, and it can also be your own perspective from as an outsider, and also seeing two different organizations, how that works. And then I want you to complete a reflection, a 2-page written paper about the project. Again, the questions will be a little bit later on these instructions. Here's the timeline I'm thinking seems pretty reasonable. Now that we've gotten to a place where we've learned about salary structures in class, we can start working on this assignment. I can have you all start reaching out to people, but also to create your own interview questions. So in week 11, I want you, and you can do all of these before the weeks that they're due. I'm just going to make sure that these assignments show up in the week's modules for those due dates. I will also put a module at the top of the modules page that has all of this information in it for this project in case you need to refer to it later. By week 11, I want the two contacts that you're going to be contacting. I want their names, email addresses, or phone numbers, whatever you're using to contact them. And then I want the organization they're from. If you have a URL that is like their professional page, you can send that as well. That would be very handy. I'm kind of curious what organizations and what contacts you choose. I will give you 10 points for each contact that you have. So if you have the two contacts by the due date, you would get 20 points, and those are going to be due Sunday, November 9th. During week 12, I want you to submit your interview questions for approval. I have in a few pages down in this instructions, I've given some example questions. I want you to go above and beyond those examples. You can use some of the examples, but I want you to create your own questions. And I also want you to tailor or customize some of these questions to the organizations that you're going to be interviewing. I want you to be able to collect information that helps you compare and contrast the organizations. I also want you to, if there are parts of this class that have been very interesting to you and you want to focus on those, I want you to be able to do that as well in these interviews. Basically, I want you to be able to say something about their strategy and something about their salary structure, but how you get to it can be different across each student. The interview, I will give you feedback on those interview questions as soon as I get them, and those will be worth 25 points. And there is a rubric at the end of these instructions on the second to last page of how I'm going to grade those interview questions for approval. And you could use AI to help create or change interview questions. I would suggest that you outline the interview questions you want to ask first. And if you want to use AI to improve those questions, you can. I would not use AI to create the questions because they will not customize or tailor very well, and they'll be super generic, and I'll be able to tell they were written by AI. Those interview questions will be due Sunday, November 16th. On week 13, and I'm going to extend week 13 through Thanksgiving week or fall break. So you have all of that time to do your interviews and submit the Zoom video recordings to me. I will give you 20 points for each video. I'm not going to grade the videos for the content in them. I just want the videos to see that you actually did the interviews. And I may be curious, I may watch some of them just to see how the interviews go. That can help me improve this assignment for the next semester. And also, if something's happening in your interviews, that's really helpful for me to know as well. Those will be due Sunday, November 30th. So that's the Sunday after Thanksgiving, so that you have that whole week to work on this if you need it. Hopefully you won't, and hopefully you can take that whole week off, or at least off from this class. But if you need it, you have it. And then the final week of class, I want you to upload your final presentation video and your reflection papers. Those will be 70 points, 60 points for the final presentation video and 15 points for the reflection papers. Those are going to be due Friday, December 12th. And it's Friday simply because the university requires that all work is due before finals week. And since we have a final exam, I want you to spend that week prepping for that final exam. So if, I want you to get your final presentation video done by then. You can make that final presentation video in Zoom, just like you're making the recordings. And again, the instructions will help you. The instructions, you may, if they're confusing at all, I would definitely Google or YouTube how to do things in Zoom. Zoom also has some really good guides on their websites that you can find. So if you get confused, you can look things up. You can also just email me and ask me questions. I would definitely, if you've not used Zoom very much, I would definitely practice before your first interview. You can try recording a video yourself and just seeing if you know how to do that, how to turn on your camera and everything on your computer. And doing that before your first interview, since you'll be using that Zoom technology for both the interviews and your final video. So I've put some information in here about how to find and contact HR professionals. I'm going to be honest, use whatever network you have. If you know people, if you work in a company and you know the HR people in your company, you can use them, at least for one of your contacts. If you have family friends or you are related to someone who works in compensation and HR, you can use them. A lot of you might have connections in LinkedIn, use them. If some of you have been going to SHRM meetings wherever you live, or in the student chapter, the Flint Hills SHRM chapter here in Manhattan, you can use those people. I think most people will be very open to doing an interview with you. In fact, they might be very excited to talk a little bit about their jobs and kind of their own opinions about the work that they do in terms of compensation. just be aware that you need to give them plenty of time. So don't try to like schedule an interview in the next week. You can try, but don't, if you're trying to do this last minute, don't do that because people may not be available. So, I would start this week, find those contacts and start contacting them and setting up interview times. That will also help you get this project done earlier if you can set that up. So I went to AI and asked it to create a like a blank email for you. You do not have to be this formal, but this will give you an idea of how you can explain this project to people. This is not research, so you do not have any kind of, you don't have to share anything more than the video with me, and then also your final analysis. I will not be sharing this information with anyone else. So if people are concerned about confidentiality, you can say it's just you and the professor who will see this information simply for this project, and it won't be used for anything else. Some professional etiquette in case you need this. Again, thinking about professionals, their timelines are a little bit different sometimes from students, so hopefully this is helpful. And then I have a background in survey research, and I've done many focus groups and interviews for my research, so I've developed a little guide here on how you might be able to develop some interview questions and what kinds of things you could think about. I would also, as you're developing interview questions, just go back to the textbook or go back to the slides and just flip through them and see if there's some topics there that you might want to specifically ask about. For example, if you're at a large organization, you may be able to ask about how like if there's going to be a different how our pay grades are organized, for example. Are there different philosophies in terms of using market pay versus job evaluation for different job families, that sort of thing? If it's a smaller organization, you may want to ask more about the history of how that salary structure was created, or if the strategy has had to change, the compensation strategy as the organization has grown, that sort of thing. Hopefully these are helpful for you as well. And then some sample interview questions. Again, I asked AI to create a few for me just to give you some generic questions to start with. You should use what question, you can use these, but I would build other questions and I would customize your questions to the organizations that you're going to be interviewing as well, or the people you're going to interview in those organizations. For your analysis presentation, what I want in your video is I want a basic introduction to the organizations and the professionals you interviewed. You can mention how you knew them, but I really need some background because a lot of you are probably going to interview people I don't know and organizations I may have never heard of. Then I want you to compare and contrast their compensation approaches with course concepts. So I want to hear some of the language that we've learned in this class. I want you to analyze the effectiveness of each approach given their business context. Did that person think this is an effective way to do salary or compensation? And then do you think it's an effective way, especially since you'll get to see two different organizations, kind of compensation philosophies, strategies, and salary structures. Identify best practices and potential improvements that you've found in these interviews. They may or may not be consistent with what we're learning in class. Remember, the textbook we're using is an economics textbook. Mostly, from my point of view, it has a lot of good advice. It has good explanations, but it doesn't go super in depth in what an HR specialist who works in compensation should do or know. So you may be able to identify additional information that we don't have in a textbook through your project, through these interviews, and I'd love to know what you're learning. And then I want you to conclude with some of your key insights and lessons learned. So the structure would look something like 1 to 2 minutes for your intro, 2 to 3 minutes for organization profiles, 4 to 5 minutes on compensation strategy comparisons, and then an analysis and evaluation of the strategy, the compensation philosophy, if you need to include that, and then how that salary structure was created, what is the process, pay grades, how are the pay grades created, are job families used, what kind of job evaluation technique do they use? How often do they do job analysis? That sort of thing. And then conclusions and recommendations for a minute or two at the end. Again, if you go over 15 minutes, don't worry about it. Go as long as you need to, but I need a minimum of 10 minutes in your video. I put a few presentation tips here. I'm going to be honest, if you want to use PowerPoint or Canva or something else where you've created slides, you don't need to show yourself on camera if you don't want to, but if you do want to, that is fine with me. So if you don't want to have to get dressed up in a suit or anything or in nice clothing to be on camera, if you want to do this late at night in your pajamas, I don't care if you don't want to show yourself on camera, you just want to show your slides, but I do need to hear you talking. through the slides. Don't put everything you're going to say on the slides though. Just put some bullet points and then tell us what, or tell me what you're thinking with those bullet points. And then here at the end is the reflection. I want you to write a 2-page reflection paper. And it's also going to be due Friday, December 12th with the video. There'll be 2 different assignments though, so you can turn one in before the other. Your reflection should be double spaced and use 12-point Times New Roman font. That way you all don't have questions about what kind of paper it should be. It should have normal margins, 1-inch margins all around. And then I want you to save this as a Word document because I want to be able to put comments in it. Or if you have, I'm going to look at grammar and stuff. I'm not going to really grade much on the grammar or anything, but I like to help improve people's writing by giving them lots of feedback. So if you do that in a Word document, it's easier for me than if it's in a PDF. I want you to address the following questions however you want to in your reflection. How did your real world findings compare to textbook descriptions of compensation systems? I'm really interested do you get more information about how this works in the real world from your interviews, or is it pretty much aligned with exactly what our book says happens? And then is there anything specific to HR that you're learning in these interviews that maybe our book doesn't cover since it's more of an economics textbook? Second, what questions would you ask differently if you could conduct the interviews again? Once you've done the interviews, knowing what you know, are there more things that you would have delved into more? Would you have talked about certain topics in more depth? Would you have asked them questions as like a devil's advocate, for example? And then 3, what surprised you most about the compensation approaches you encountered? And this can be very individual. Maybe you don't know anything about compensation approaches generally, just whatever we've learned in class is all you know. Maybe you've worked in a company and you've seen it work or not work, and so you could compare and contrast your own experience with what these individuals told you in the interviews. So I just really want you to critically think about what you've learned. And this is actually also a good strategy at work when you work on a big project, doing a reflection at the end by yourself, but also maybe if you were with the team can be very helpful in improving your learning from that project, but also if you have to do this again to make that project better in the future. I hope this overview video was really helpful in terms of how to do the project. I do want to mention that there are rubrics at the end for both the interview questions, and I've tried to kind of tell you how many points things are going to be and what like kind of what the levels are in terms of what you need to complete in order to earn those points. So the interview questions will be 25 points, and then the very last one is the actual final presentation video. It will be 60 points. Your reflection, I didn't do a rubric on because as long as you address those 3 questions and it's at least 2 pages, that should be enough detail for me to be able to pretty much give you a pass fail. If you don't meet the minimum requirements or don't address all the questions, I may deduct points, but otherwise I want you to be truthful and honest in your reflection. So I didn't want to put a rubric on it as well. But if you have any questions about the rubrics and how I'll be grading you with those rubrics, please let me know. This is the first time I'm doing this project, so if there are any questions that you have, don't hesitate to email me. I can also update this information for the rest of the class in case everyone else has the same questions about the project. I was trying to be as thorough as possible, but I am not you. And I have an idea in my head of what I think you all will do, at least very basic idea, but you may have other ideas and feel free to ask me questions about those ideas as well.